Now we're going to begin on Daf Tes Amud Beis with Tanu Rabbanon on the top line, and we're about to enter into a very basic sugya about Yovel. The Torah says at the end of Sefer Vayikra, Hashana, it says, "Va'avarta shofar trua b'chodesh hashvi ukrasem dror ba'aretz l'chol yoshver Yovel hi tiyeh lachem v'shavtem ish el akuzaso v'ish el mishpachto tashuvu lo sizru v'lo siktru es vicheha v'lo sivtru es nizarel." So there are four dimensions here mentioned in the pasuk with regard to Yovel. Number one, the Torah commands us to blow the shofar on Yom Kippurim of the Yovel year. Number two, to send the avonim free. We're talking about an Eved Ivri. Number three, the sados, the fields that were sold by their owners, go back to their original owners. And number four, we're not allowed to do avodas karka. However, there are four words in this long series of three psukim that are redundant and unnecessary. And those are Yovel hi tiyeh lachem. The Torah had already said that we had to sanctify the 50th year's Yovel. So there must be some drasha that we're going to derive from the extra words Yovel hi tiyeh lachem. And we're going to learn now about Tanoim and the difference of opinions as to what conditions have to be met in order for the Isra Avodas Karka on Yovel to be Chal. Tanu Rabbanon, we learned in a Bryce, Yovel hi tiyeh lachem, an extra pasuk. And the Torah is saying that this year will always be Yovel, which means that the Torah is being marbeh, a ribui, with regard to the Isser of Avodas Karka. And what is that ribui? Afal pi shelo shamtu. Okay, now we have to talk about the word shamtu. Shamtu literally means to pick up your hands and release something. And what is the Torah? Who is the Torah addressing? The Torah is addressing the konim, the lokuchos, who purchased fields from the original owner. And shamtu means that the buyers have to lift up their hands and release their ownership rights on the fields. And the fields automatically revert back to the original buyer, the original owner. But why do I need this reboot with regard to Avodas Karka? I mean, the Torah has certainly prohibited Avodas Karka to tell me that Afal pi shelo shamtu, that even though they did not return the fields to original bailing. We'll have to see exactly why this didn't happen, but it didn't happen. So now that the Jewish people are not observing that dimension of Yovel, namely that the return of the fields, now I might think that the other dimension of Yovel, namely the Isser Avodas Karka, should also be suspended. So we need the extra pasuk Yovel hi to teach me that it's always going to be Yovel, and the Avodas Karka is always going to be prohibited during the 50th year, even though vis-a-vis another dimension of Yovel, namely Achzaras Asados, that they weren't observing. Not only that, Afal pi shelo taku. Another one of the dimensions of Yovel is that they have to blow the shofar from the Bezdin on Yom Kippurim. And in this particular case, for whatever reason, they did not blow the shofar on the 10th of Tishrei in Bezdin. Nevertheless, the Isra Avodas Karka is going to be activated, and it's independent of Hachzaras HaKarkos and of Tkiyah Shofar. Yochel, I might think, Afal pi shelo shilchu. Oh, there's another dimension of Yovel. This is number 4, that the Avodim Eved Ivri goes free. And what happens if they didn't free the Eved Ivri? Maybe there was no Eved Ivri to free. How do I know that even in that case, we still are enjoined? No, I'm sorry. Yochel, I might think that even if we did not free the avodah, nevertheless we'd be enjoined from doing the avodas hasadeh. Talmud Lomar, he. Now we have the opposite of what we started with. We started with, in a sense, a ribui to tell us that there's an absolute obligation that enjoins us from avodas karka during Yovel, and it's not dependent neither on Hatzaras Hasados nor on the Tkiyah Shofar. But now we have a pasuk he that's telling me, you know what? The Isra of avodas karka during Yovel is not absolute; it is contingent, because he is a mute to tell me that under certain circumstances there will not be a din of an Isra avodas karka. And one of those circumstances, if they did not free their slaves. So it turns out that you could take the entity of Yovel, which is made up, as we said, of 4 dimensions, and you could divide them into 2. 2 out of the 4 versus 2 out of them. 2 out of the 4, which imply Hachzaras Hasados plus Tkiyah Shofar, those dimensions are not related and play no role as far as the Isra avodas karka. Now we move over to the other side of the equation, and that's avodas karka and shichur avodim. Those two go hand in hand and are interdependent. So if they're not freeing the slaves, then there's no Isra enjoining us from avodas karka. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. This is the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Now, we don't know why Rabbi Yehuda, when he has the beard of he singles out Shiluach Avodim. Why is that so? I mean, maybe it should be about Hatzaras HaKarkos L'Baleim, maybe it should be Tkiyah Shofar. That's going to come up in the Gemara. So Ad Kan, until now, we have the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi over here. Rabbi Yossi disagrees. And what does he do with Yovel? What does he do with the word he? So Yovel, he is coming to tell you that the Isra avodas karka in this year applies af pishlo shamtu, even though they didn't return the karkos to the balei and af pishlo shilch. Here's where he deviates from the position of Rabbi Akiva. And he is saying that the Isra avodas karka is independent of Shiluach Avodim against Rabbi Yehuda. So as Rabbi Yehuda sees Shiluach Avodim as a precondition for the Isra avodas karka, they belong together as one entity. According to Rabbi Yossi, no, we're going to take Shiluach Avodim and move it over to the other side of the equation as something that's irrelevant to avodas karka, Isra avodas karka. Oh, so what will be the critical element and condition that has to be met in order for the Isra avodas karka to be activated? Yocham, I think, afal pishlo taku Talmud Lomer he. So the word he now is memayit and introduces a contingency as far as avodas karka. Avodas karka is contingent on the blowing of the shofar. Now we're going to begin in this machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. We're going to begin with the latter shita, with the last shita quoted here in the Brisa, and that is that of Rabbi Yossi. That's going to integrate Iser Karka together with Shiluach Avodim. I'm sorry, just let me get that straight again. That we're going to Afal Pi Shalosh Shamtu, the Afal Pi Shalosh Shamtu, but we need Tkiyah Shofar. So if I'm using the word integration, meaning contingency plan, the Isra avodas karka, according to Rabbi Yossi, will be contingent on Tkiyah Shofar. So Rabbi Yossi says the following: we had on the one hand the pasuk Yovel he tia lachem as a ribui. On the other hand, we had the word he as a mute, how do I know which is referring to what? What's being added and included and what's being excluded. He's asking himself he's reflecting on his own shita. Why do I say that Yovel, afal pishlo shilchu, and ein Yovel elim kein taku? Why do I cut off the interdependence? I cut the umbilical cord between the Yitzhak Malacha and the Shiluach Avodim, but instead I replace it with Tkiyah Shofar, that the Isser Avodas Karka is contingent on the Tkiyah Shofar. And here's where Rabbi Yossi comes up with this svar. He says, Leficha Efshar Olam below Shiluach Avodim, the Efshar Olam below Tkiyah Shofar. It's very possible, it's very feasible that in the entire world there are no Avodim Ivriim that are owned by Jews, and therefore there'll never be a fulfillment of the mitzvah of Shiluach Avodim. That reality is quite possible, plausible. However, to tell me that there'll be a situation in which we don't have Tkiyah Shofar, there's got to be one shofar somewhere in the face of the earth, and therefore Efshar Liolam below Tkiyah Shofar. And now we understand the logic of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi's arguing that the Torah would make Yovel contingent on something which is quote unquote matzui l'kaima. We know that we have the ability of fulfilling that condition, and that Yovel will therefore be activated once that condition will be met. If the condition of Tkiyah Shofar is one that we can anticipate will be met somewhere on the face of the earth, we'll find a shofar blower together with a shofar, and that's what we'll find. But it's not logical to assume that the Torah is going to make Yovel, in this case, the Isser of Melechas HaKarka, contingent upon something that is out of our control, that may be or may not be. If there's no Avodim Ivriim on the face of the earth, then there won't be any Shiluach Avodim. So it makes no sense to argue that Avodas Karka, which is the essence of Yovel, should be contingent on Shiluach Avodim. More logical to say that Avodas Karka is contingent upon the Tkiyas Shofar. But keep in mind again that Rabbi Yehuda holds that the Isser of Avodas Karka and Yovel is contingent upon Shiluach Avodim. Even though L'chora Rabbi Yossi's right. I mean, how do we know that there will be Shiluach Avodim? See, you're making the entire enterprise of Yovel and its Isser Karka, the Kedushas Karka of Yovel, contingent on something that may or may not be fulfilled. We don't even have the power to fulfill it. He writes here in the note that Ilu Haya Yovel Toli B'Shiluach Avodim, according to the argument of Rabbi Yossi, if Yovel will be contingent on freeing the Avodim, Im Lo Hayu Avodim Ivri B'Yisrael B'Chala Olam, if we don't find one Eved Ivri anywhere on the face of the globe, Lo Haya Chala Yovel, there would be no Yovel. That's the premise that Rabbi Yossi is working with. And in fact, a number of Achronim and Chaschinov and Sfasevis, they say Alok L'Maisa, that according to Rabbi Yossi, if there's no Shiluach Avodim, because there's not a single Eved on the face of the earth, then there's no Yovel, meaning there's no Isra Avodas Karka. However, the fact that there could be such a reality is going to persuade and convince Rabbi Yossi that it's impossible that the Isser Avodas Karka would be dependent on Shiluach Avodim. And therefore, there will be an Isra of Avodas Karka. So in other words, again, there was a Havamina that Yovel depends upon Shiluach Avodim. If there was no Avodim to be sent, then there would be no Yovel. And the Maskon is no. Yovel stands independent of Shiluach Avodim. Even if there's no Shiluach Avodim, it still will be Yovel, and it'll be an Isra Avodas Karka. Dovar. Now the Gemara offers an alternative explanation for Rabbi Yossi as to why the Isra Avodas Karka of Yovel should be contingent on Shofar. Zo Mesura Lebezdin, Vizo Eina Mesura Lebezdin. In other words, we can anticipate that this condition, namely Tkiyah Shofar, will be fulfilled, and therefore the Isra Avodas Karka will be realized, and the condition will be realized, because that's Mesura Lebezdin. But when you're talking about Shiluach Avodim, each individual, if he owned an Eved Ivri, would have to be Meshacher, you'd have to be Meshalech his Eved. And it doesn't make sense that the Torah would make the Chalos Yovel depend upon a mitzvah that's Mesura Liyachidim, meaning that if they decide we refuse to be Meshalech our Avodim, so then Yovel won't be Chal. That's not logical. My Dovarach, the Gemara wants to know what's lacking in the first explanation, that the Brisa felt compelled to offer an alternative solution. And here's the Havamina that we would have perhaps offered if we didn't have the second solution and we only had the first interpretation. There's got to be at least one Jew somewhere out in the world that is required to be Shalech his Avodim, his Eved, during Yovel. So therefore, what's the compelling logic that the Torah could not have possibly made Yovel contingent upon Shiluach Avodim? You tell me that there won't be Shiluach Avodim? There's got to be one Eved somewhere out in, in the Antarctica that he owns the Eved. And therefore, one might reject the first explanation and substitute the second one, Zu Mesura Lebezdin, the Zu Eina Mesura Lebezdin. Now the Gemara goes back to Rabbi Yehuda. Bishleim, Rabbi Yossi understand, time he explained why he thinks that Yovel depends upon Tkiyah Shofar. El Rabbi Yehuda, my timer, what's the logic that compels Rabbi Yehuda to assume and postulate that Yovel depends upon Shiluach Avodim? Omar Kra, because the Pasuk says, this is going to be the underlying logic of Rabbi Yehuda. It says, Yovel hi tia lochem, and then it says, Ukrosem drar ba'aretz. Get the sequence. I'm sorry, it says, Ukrosem drar ba'aretz, Yovel hi tia lochem. Now, Krosem drar ba'aretz means call the freedom, proclaim the freedom of the Avodim during Yovel. And the mitzvah of Tkiyah Shofar appears in an earlier pasuk. We should really take out a. See. We'll just read it from he copies over the pasuk here, so it's not as great as going back to the Chumash. But first it says Havartem Shofar, etc. Then it says Ukrosem drar ba'aretz, and then it says Yovel hi tia lochem. So that's the sequence. Shofar, then Shiluach Avodim, and then Yovel. So what is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion? Because Rabbi Yehuda's opinion in Drashos and that goes way beyond the confines of our sugya, is Mikra Midrash Lefana. That when you're analyzing the meaning of a pasuk, of a verse, then go back to the previous pasuk. V'lo lifnei fanav. You don't go back to two psukim earlier. And in that, if that be the case, then since it says Yovel, and the previous pasuk is Ukras and Jar Ba'aretz, the pasuk is connecting Shichur Avodim Jar Ba'aretz with Yovel, with Yisrael Karka, and making those two interdependent. In the previous pasuk it says Vavartem Shofar. That's Lifnai Lefan. And Rabbi Yehuda rejects a drasha of Lifnai Fan. So therefore, when the Torah says he, which is a miyut that tells you avodas karka is contingent on something, we're going to assume it's contingent on that which came immediately before it. That's called lefanav, and that's shichur avodim ukras and jar ba'aretz. The Gemara says the kuli alma, meaning both Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda. Jurar, Lashon Cheres, they agree that Ukras and Jar Ba'aretz means to be Meshacher, the Eved, my mashma. What is the etymology, the Shoresh, the word Drar, Ukras and Jar Ba'aretz, that we interpret Drar to mean freedom of the slaves? This Sani will enter the Brisa, Ein Drar El Lashon Cheres. That the word Drar means freedom. Rabbi Yehuda, my Lashon Drar, Kimidayer Bei Dayara. In other words, wherever you want to live, that's where you're allowed to live. We call it laissez-faire. Go ahead and decide where you want to set up your domicile. A person is permitted to live anywhere where his heart desires. Umovil schara b'chol medina. And he can import or export his merchandise from any country that he so chooses. And it means that he's not meshubah to anyone else. He's not committed to anyone else. That's the meaning of the word drar, and therefore Ukras and Jar Ba'aretz refers to shichur avodim, because the avodim have no freedom, and now we're going to free the avodim such that they can live wherever they want, and they can do business with whoever they want. Rab Chia bar Abba, Rab Yochanan, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, this Brisa that we've studied until now does not exhaust the entire spectrum of views on this topic. According to the Chachamim, 3 dimensions of Yovel form one indivisible package, and therefore it means Tkiyat Shofar, Shiluach Avodim, and the return of the Sados to their original Bailam. And they're all Ma'akfos. There will be no Isar Avodas Karka unless these 3 mitzvos were fulfilled. Tkiyat Shofar, Shiluach Avodim, and Achzara Sados L'Bailam. And now the Gemara is going to explain the Shita the Chacham, because Savri, they're of the opinion that Mikra Nidrash Lefanav, Ilifnei Fanav, Uliachra. So we have the pasuk Yovel He. We're going to go back to the previous pasuk Udrasim Karba Oretz, and back to the pasuk that comes before that of Tkiyah Shofar Vartim Shofar, and the pasuk afterwards of Achzara Sakarka L'Baleim. All 4 elements and dimensions of the mitzvah of Yovel will be chal together as one indivisible package. So the Gemara asks for Ksiv Yovel. What are we doing with the ribui? Remember, we started with a ribui from Yovel He, and then we got to the miyut of He. Well, what was the ribui? The ribui seems to indicate that Yovel is not contingent upon something. So the Gemara says that the Chacham have a totally different drasha to be derived from Yovel. And the Gemara answers who the ribui of Yovel is Ba'afilu b'chutz la'aretz. That as far as Shiluach Avodim is concerned, that law applies even in chutz la'aretz. Now, I'm a little bit confused. I looked around. I couldn't find an answer. Who's in chutz la'aretz here? Is it A, the master, the owner of the Eved? Is it B, the Eved himself is in chutz la'aretz? Is it C, both are in chutz la'aretz? It seems that all the above are correct. No matter what the scenario is, there's going to be shikra avodim. What do you say? Right. See, what confuses me is because the Gemara Gittin says that if an Eved runs away to chutz la'aretz, then we can't bring him back and be mishabed. He breaks his shibud. So that I don't really need, in a case of chutz la'aretz, if the Eved went to chutz la'aretz, I don't need the halach of Yovel. You know, we're trying to derive that Yovel applies to break up your ownership of the Eved in chutz la'aretz. For the very fact that he ran to chutz la'aretz. And the answer might be three. There are three possible answers to my question. Either that halacha applies only when you start in Eretz Yisrael and the Eved ran, he fled to chutz la'aretz. Or maybe our case is where the entire Avdus was going on in chutz la'aretz, the owner of the Eved and the Eved. Or maybe the halacha of running to chutz la'aretz maybe only applies to an Eved Knani. Here we're talking about an Eved Ivri. So the Gemara now asks the fine question about Ksiv Ba'aretz. In the pasuk it says with cross and draw Ba'aretz, implying it's only in Eretz Yisrael. So the Gemara answers who that pasuk Ba'aretz is not telling me that Shiluach Avodim is exclusively applicable in Eretz Yisrael, but rather it's telling me that this man shenoig drar, when the Shiluach Avodim Ba'aretz is then noeg the Shiluach Avodim b'chutz la'aretz, also in chutz la'aretz. But bisman sheshiluach eino noeg ba'aretz. Let's say that just one second. Bisman she'eino noeg ba'aretz, eino noeg b'chutz la'aretz. Oh, see, these words eino noeg ba'aretz have to be understood based on a Gemara elsewhere, actually, set the Erechim, that Yovel only applies when you have what's called Kol Yoshver Lel. That means all of Klal Yisrael will live in Eretz Yisrael. The domicile of every last Jew on the face of the earth is in Eretz Yisrael. That's a precondition for Yovel. In fact, today, there wouldn't be Yovel, at least on a Doraisa level, because we have Jews who are in, Bathurst and Steel, right? So the Eino Noeg Ba'aretz means that if we don't have Kol Yoshver Lel, and therefore there's no Shiluach Avodim in Eretz Yisrael, then there won't be Shiluach Avodim in Chutz La'aretz. We don't need Shiluach Avodim in Eretz Yisrael before, but we need that there be a possibility of Shiluach Avodim in Eretz Yisrael. So that the din of Shiluach Avodim crossing Jar Ba'aretz and Chutz La'aretz is an extension of Eretz Yisrael. So you start with Eretz Yisrael and then you move to the periphery outside of the bounds of Eretz Yisrael. But if there's no Yovel and Shiluach Avodim in Eretz Yisrael, then there's no Shiluach Avodim in Chutz La'aretz. Now at this juncture, we begin our study of Zeroim. And this is going to go on for at least 3-4 blocks. S, Yud, Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, Yud Dalet, Tesvav. I wouldn't even call it Masechet Rosh Hashana now. Call it Masechet Zeroim. Linetiyah. That means that Aleph Tishrei determines the year as far as Orla and Neter Ravad. Which means that let's say he plants a tree, a sapling, in the month of Av. When we get to the 1st of Tishrei, it's considered as if that planting, that netiyah, has completed itself, and there already was one full year, even though in fact it was only 1 month from Av to Tishrei is a skip and a hop of 1 month of Elul. Nevertheless, that's considered like 1 year. So when we calculate Orla, that year after that month after the Natiyah in Av is going to be considered like 1 full year of Orla. We're already into the second year once we pass Aleph Tishrei. So the Gemara asks me, Nola, from whence do we derive this conclusion that Aleph Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah for Orla and Ravai? And I think the underlying issue here, why is Gemara, the agenda is we have to find a source for this, and it's otherwise we would have said otherwise. But why? Because Orla and Ravai applies to Peres Elon, and Rosh Hashanah for Peres Elon is Shvat. So how do we know that as far as Orla and Ravai, Rosh Hashanah Le'ilon is Aleph Tishrei? Because right now, the Gemara is on the verge of making Rosh Hashanah Le'ilanos a very complex hybrid halacha, because there are two different elements in Rosh Hashanah Le'ilanos. One is which year for Meiser, and that's going to be Shvat, and the other is which year for Orla, and that's going to be Aleph Tishrei. And the Gemara answers the Chsiv in the Parsha of Orla and Parsha Kedoshim. I'll read the whole passage. It says, "V'nitatem kol eitz machol, v'araltem orlosa, es pirio shalosh shanim yelachem arelim lo ye'achem." Okay, so that's the main pasuk Ksiv, but in the very next pasuk, which is Ravai, it says B'shana Ravius Yeh Kol Pirio Kodesh. So the year is called a Shana, both with regard to Orla, where it says Shalosh Shanim, and with regard to Ravai, where it says B'shana Ravius. Okay, so we know that both Orla and Ravai are called Shana. Now, let's compare that to another context of Shana. Yolef Shana Shana mi Tishrei. Tichseu, the Torah says in Dvarim Perek Aleph, Meirishis Hashana. So Tishrei is called Shana, the beginning of the year. And just like the year begins with Tishrei, so too as far as Orla and Neter Ravai is concerned, the same Shana means that we begin with Tishrei. So the Gemara immediately objects. V'ligmar Shana Shana mi Nisan. The word Shana appears in the context of Nisan. It says Rishon hu lachem l'chodshei Hashana. It says the word Shana. But the only difference is that with regard to Aleph Tishrei as Rosh Hashanah, it says Meirishis Hashana. With regard to Nisan, it says Chodshei Hashana. So it's really not focused on the year, but rather on the months of the year. So the Gemara says, in answer to the question, why do we use Aleph Tishrei and not Nisan, is Danim Shana. She'eni Machadashim, Mishana She'eni Machadashim. Vein Danim Shana She'eni Machadashim, Mishana She'eshi Machadashim. In Orla and Ravai, and also with regard to Tishrei as Rosh Hashanah, the year is called a Shana. And therefore those lend themselves magnetically, to form one entity. But in the case of Nisan, there the Torah calls it Chodshei Hashem. That's not included in this Gzeir Hashem. Ton Rabbanan. Now we get to some of the details about Orla and Ravai. Echad Anotea, he plants a tree, a brand new sapling into the ground. Echad HaMavrich. Mavrich means he has a tree that's growing and he takes one of the branches and he bends it down and inserts it into the ground, and then it takes root in the ground. What he does afterwards, this Mavrich guy, is that he cuts down the connection between this branch and the tree, and he has himself a brand new tree. Echad HaMarkiv. Markiv means he cuts off a branch from one tree and grafts it onto another tree. So if he does any of the above, Erev Shvius, in the year of Shishis, If he does it shloshim yom lifnei Rosh Hashana, 30 days before Rosh Hashana, he does this grafting or cutting or markiv, mavriv, notea, is then also Hoshana. It's got to be 30 days before Rosh Hashanah. And once it's 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, it's considered like a full year. And also Hoshana, which means that going into Aleph Tishrei, he's already in the second year of counting the years of Orla and Ravai. Umuta l'kaimon b'shvius. He says that even though he planted, and while he was mavrik or marked on Erev Shvius, and therefore we would consider l'chora these ilonos that were planted as if they were planted on Shvius, and therefore we would have to be oker them. But if he was notea or mavrik or markiv on any other year, which is not Erev, is pachos v'shloshim yom lifnei Rosh Hashanah lo also lo shana. He also l'kaimon b'shvius. He's not allowed to be mekayim them in shvius. He has to be okered. Why? Because it was within 30 days before Rosh Hashanah. So it means that Tishrei of the following year will be the end of the first year. Why? Because he did the planting within 30 days before Rosh Hashanah. And in the case of Shishis, since he planted it within 30 days before Shvius on Erev Shvius, also l'kaim b'Shvius. He has to be oker, uproot the planting like an elon that was planted during Shvius that has to be uprooted. He writes here, v'af, shebepachos b'shloshim yom kodem shnas hashmita osur lotas mishum tosefes. He says, in a period of time which is less than 30 days before the Aleph Tishrei of Shemitah, 7th year, you're not allowed to plant because of the halacha of Tosefes. And this leads us to Daf Yud, which Mir Hashem will pick up tomorrow.